Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this is Taking Care of Business. Joining me today is Alicia Planincic, who is an economist with the Business Council of Alberta. Thanks for joining us today, Alicia.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the Business Council today released a couple of reports on Alberta's economy, a kind of an overview, looking at what's happening in the province. Tell me from your perspective, what were some of the key highlights or the key findings from what you researched?
Sure. So if I could, just to take a little bit of a step back and tell you about the broader project. So the broader project that we're really excited about is something called Define the Decade. And the goal of this project is really to define a vision for what we want Alberta to look like 10 years from now. And so we've been engaging literally thousands of Albertans from all over the province to build this vision. And the other part of this project is to actually build an economic development strategy for how do we actually achieve that vision. And so tons of research pouring into this project to make sure that we get it right. Today, what we released is kind of what we're calling our part one, which is basically where is Alberta today? So it's kind of just taking an honest look, kind of a look in the mirror, if you will, of where does Alberta currently stand? And so kind of what are those recent trends and where do we stand? And I think a couple of things really stand out when we look at the recent trends leading up to COVID. One is how much things have actually changed in Alberta. So looking at the data and those recent trends, there's almost two very distinct time periods. There's the time period 2000 to 2014, and then following the crash 2014 to leading up to the pandemic. And so I think that was really a big takeaway from this work, and also underscores why we think it's so important to build our future a bit more intentionally, looking ahead in future years.
So when you look at those time periods, and I would imagine that since 2014, we have seen an acceleration of the diversification of the economy. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, so that is true. Whether or not that's good or not is a bit of a different question. So I think the one concern is, even though we are in a sense more diverse, the unfortunate thing we're seeing is we're not seeing a lot of growth in those other areas. So we've seen a decline, right, in oil and gas as far as the GDP that it brings in for the province, but we haven't really seen any other industries capable of overcoming that loss there.
And I guess part of it too is the oil and gas companies themselves, right? In terms of embracing new technologies and clean technologies has got to be a big factor.
Definitely. So I think, one thing that's really important to know about oil and gas is, from a GDP perspective, it's going to continue to be a huge value generator for our province for years and years to come. But from an employment perspective, it's not going to be what it likely has been in the past, because of all the automation that's gone on in the industry, right, to compete in this lower priced world that we've been in over the last 5 years. So I think one of the big takeaways for me is how many folks who don't have any sort of post-secondary education have actually left the labor force. So as those really high-paying jobs have left and gone away to automation and other cost-cutting measures to make the industry more productive, the unfortunate reality is there are a lot of folks who have been left with a lot fewer opportunities. And so I think getting that right moving forward, making sure those folks have opportunity in Alberta, is going to be something really important for the next decade.
Let's talk about employment. The numbers are better, obviously, when it comes to the labor market in Alberta, better today than they have been. But we still have quite a high unemployment rate in this province, and especially Calgary. And I'm wondering, what can you say about the employment picture in Alberta right now, and why is the unemployment rate still so high?
Yeah, I think it goes back to those struggles and the challenges that we were facing even before the pandemic. And so I think that's something that we really noticed in the report. I can even speak to that personally. I moved here in November of 2019, and I sent my resume into a whole bunch of businesses, very few of whom I heard back from. So I just think it's a very challenging market right now in Alberta. As it has been and as it was before the pandemic. On top of that, I think the other thing we need to think about is there's kind of this disconnect between increasingly the types of skills that employers are looking for versus folks who are unemployed or even out of the labor force and the skills that they have. So even, one thing interesting looking at something like manufacturing, one of the trends we're seeing is they're not necessarily lifting for folks who have the physical capabilities anymore. It's more so being able to work with robots, right? Who can do the literal heavy lifting.
Yeah, exactly. When we look at the labor situation and, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business put out a release today, actually talking about labor shortages and concerns for many small business owners in being able to find people. And, just personally, everywhere I look, I see these days job postings, right? And also, just on the front doors of businesses. So this labor shortage, what impact is that going to have on the province's ability to move forward economically?
Yeah, definitely big. And I think one thing to keep in mind is one thing we're noticing is this isn't even just the pandemic. It's actually, we're seeing kind of a wave of retirement and of folks leaving certain industries, and we're not having as many people coming into those industries. And this is something just to kind of preview into our second part of our work that we'll share that is only going to increase, right, as the population ages and as folks, especially in construction and the trades, are retiring, in huge amounts, and we're not seeing the same number of people going into those trades. So I think, again, thinking ahead a little bit more proactively to ensure that we're highlighting the skilled trades and the importance of that work is just kind of one piece that we need to think about.
So setting aside the oil and gas industry for a minute here, when you look at the sectors of the economy, in Alberta, what are going to be the key sectors for this province moving forward?
Yeah, great question. I think the way we see it is it's not kind of a one or the other, it's a both and. So I think looking at the data, it's very clear that oil and gas, for instance, agriculture, they're going to continue to be really important drivers of our economic growth as they have been in the past into the future. But as well, I think we're going to start to see, and we already are seeing growth in these other burgeoning industries, right? Like tech, like AI. And so I think, looking to the future, it's just about how can we encourage that even further.
Okay, and speaking of the future, where do you go from here following these reports? What's next?
Yeah, so our part 2 report, which I'm really excited about, will be launched in January, is looking at the global forces and trends that are going to affect us into the next decade. So thinking a little bit beyond where we currently are, what are those global forces that are at play, and how is Alberta suited to positioned against those forces?
Okay, and just to wrap it up, Alicia, when you put together all these reports, like what happens next?
Yeah, so the final report is going to be essentially that vision of that Albertans want to see for the province 10 years from now, and that economic development strategy for how to get there. I think one of our big goals with this project is not just to publish the report and kind of let it fall by the wayside, but the next step after that is really to ensure that we're actively moving the needle on those issues and seeing those policy recommendations put into place and reviewing Alberta's progress year after year.
Okay, super. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Okay, that was Alicia Planincic, who is economist with Business Council of Alberta. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.